Paris. The year is 1572. Imagine a city packed with over 200,000 people, winding medieval streets, and a skyline dominated by the spires of churches. It's a city full of prayers, but even more so, it's a city full of fear. On one night, faith didn't bring peace. It became a weapon. By morning, the cobblestones weren't just wet with rains. The streets were covered in blood. This is the story of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. For years, France had been tearing itself apart. This wasn't a war against a foreign invader. It was an internal rot, a conflict born from the most personal thing a human can have: religion. On one side, you had the Catholics, determined to keep the traditional order. On the other, the Protestants, known as Huguenots, who were hungry for change. They prayed to the same God, but they held very different beliefs about how to reach him. By the mid-1500s, Protestant ideas were spreading through France like wildfire. These Huguenots weren't just commoners. They were noblemen, soldiers, and thinkers. They challenged the power of the Catholic Church and, by extension, they challenged the crown itself. The tension was constant. Arguments over scripture turned into street riots. Riots turned into targeted violence. And eventually, that violence exploded into a series of brutal civil wars. At the center of this hurricane stood one of the most controversial figures in history, Catherine de' Medici. She was the Queen Mother, a power broker who had seen 3 of her sons sit on a shaky throne. Catherine wasn't a religious zealot. She was a survivor. She was caught in a lethal vice. Catholics wanted the Protestants wiped off the map, while Protestants were demanding equal rights and a seat at the table. Catherine's only goal was balance, keeping her family in power while the country burned around them. To fix a broken nation, Catherine tried a desperate gamble, a royal wedding. She invited her enemies right into the heart of Paris. The plan was to marry her Catholic daughter, Marguerite, to the young Protestant leader, Henry of Navarre. It was supposed to be a symbol of peace, a way to stitch the two faiths back together. In August 1572, thousands of high-ranking Protestants poured into Paris. They came dressed in their finest silks, trusting the king's promise of safety. But Paris was a Catholic stronghold. The people of Paris didn't see guests. They saw heretics. The air was thick with resentment. The peace lasted exactly for days. Then an assassin shot Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, the most powerful Protestant leader in France. He survived the hit, but the city didn't calm down. It tensed up like a pulled bowstring. The Protestants were furious, demanding justice. The Catholics were terrified of a reprisal. Behind closed doors at the Louvre, a panicked decision was made: eliminate the Protestant leaders before they could strike back. The date was August 24th, St. Bartholomew's Day. In the pre-dawn darkness, the church bells began to ring. That was the signal. It started with Coligny. Soldiers burst into his room, murdered him, and threw his body out the window into the street. But then the violence took on a life of its own. It wasn't just soldiers anymore, it was a mob. Neighbors who had lived next to each other for decades suddenly turned on one another. Doors were kicked in. Families were dragged from their beds and killed in front of their children. the streets became a slaughterhouse. Bodies were piled so high that they blocked the narrow alleys, and the River Seine turned red as it carried the dead away. King Charles IX reportedly tried to stop the chaos at first, but once the blood started flowing, he accepted it. The massacre became official. The killing didn't stay in Paris. Like a virus, the violence spread across the French countryside for weeks. History struggles to find an exact number, but experts estimate between 5,000 and 30,000 people were killed. Henry of Navarre, the groom at the wedding that started it all, only survived by forced conversion to Catholicism. He would eventually become King Henry IV, the man who finally brought a fragile peace to France. But the cost was astronomical. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre left deep, permanent scars on the soul of France. Trust between the faiths was shattered for centuries. In the end, this wasn't a holy war. It was what happens when fear is given permission to act. It is a reminder of how quickly different beliefs can be turned into a reason to destroy one another. History remembers, and it warns us.